Hi, my name's Emily Carter, I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you a story I've never shared so openly before. It's a story about family, cruelty, and how being underestimated can sometimes be the greatest gift life hands you. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the middle child of 3 daughters. My parents always had a way of making me feel invisible. My older sister, Rebecca, was the golden child. Tall, blonde, ambitious, she had that magnetic personality that made people gravitate toward her. She was a cheerleader, class president, and, in my parents' eyes, practically perfect. My younger sister, Claire, was the baby. Artistic, witty, and admittedly gorgeous, she could draw a picture that looked like it belonged in a gallery by the time she was 10. Everyone doted on her, excused her mistakes, spoiled her endlessly. And then there was me, plain, brown-haired, average grades, quiet voice. I wasn't ugly, but I wasn't stunning either. I wasn't dumb, but I wasn't exceptional. I was ordinary, and my family never let me forget it. I remember one night, when I was around 16, overhearing my mom talking to my aunt in the kitchen. I had just finished washing the dishes and went upstairs quietly, but I paused at the landing when I heard my name. She's sweet, but I just don't see Emily ever really standing out, my mom said, her voice low but sharp enough to see UT. My aunt chuckled. Not everyone needs to shine, Karen. Maybe she'll marry someone nice and live a simple life. And then came the words that stayed with me for years. Honestly, my mom sighed, I don't think she'll ever find a good husband. She's just too ordinary. I froze. My hands gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white. Too ordinary. Like I was destined to be a footnote in everyone else's story. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, feeling like my entire life had already been written for me, and it wasn't a story worth reading. Fast forward a few years, and that label followed me everywhere. At tea family dinners, my sisters would laugh about the boys who chased them, the parties they were invited to, the compliments they got. Meanwhile, if I mentioned a crush or a date, my parents would exchange looks like, really? Someone's interested in her. Once, at Thanksgiving, my dad even said, half joking but not really, Emily, you should learn to cook better. It might be your only way of catching a man. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but inside, it burned. By the time I graduated high school, I had convinced myself they were right. I didn't apply to any big universities. I didn't chase any big dreams. I settled for a local community college and a part-time job at a coffee shop. It was safe. Unremarkable. Ordinary, exactly what they expected. But here's the funny thing about life, sometimes the greatest storms start in the quietest skies, and my storm began the day I met Daniel. He wasn't who you'd picture when you think billionaire husband. In fact, when I first met him, I had no idea who he really was. It was a rainy Tuesday. The kind of day where the sky feels like it's pressing down on you. I was at the coffee shop, hair frizzy, apron damp, trying to mop up the mess from a leaky window. That's when he walked in, tall, dark hair slightly messy, wearing a plain grey hoodie and jeans. He didn't look rich, didn't carry himself like some powerful man. He just looked tired. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream. His voice was low, almost rough, like he hadn't slept in days. When I handed him the cup, our eyes met for a second longer than usual. And instead of looking away like most people did, he smiled, not a polite smile. Not a forced one. A real one. Like he actually saw me, and for the first time in years, I felt visible. We started talking. He came in the next day. And the next. Sometimes he'd bring a laptop, other times just a notebook. He always sat in the corner booth, sipping his coffee slowly, watching the rain or typing furiously. His name was Daniel. He was working on some projects, he said. Nothing fancy. Nothing specific, and I didn't pry. Because for once, someone was interested in me. Not in spite of me, but because of me. We talked about books, about childhood memories, about silly dreams. I told him about how my family thought I was too ordinary. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss it. He just looked at me and said, ordinary people are the ones who change the world. Because no one sees them coming. That sentence lodged itself deep inside me, like a spark waiting to ignite. We started dating. Slowly at first, then all at once. My parents were skeptical, to say the least. When I first brought him home for dinner, my mom eyed his hoodie like it was a crime against fashion. My dad asked him what he did for a living, and Daniel smiled politely, saying, I'm in business. Still building some things. That answer wasn't good enough for them. Later that night, my mom cornered me in the kitchen. Emily, she whispered, don't get your hopes up. Men like that, well, they're not going anywhere. You don't want to waste your time. Waste my time, that phrase made my chest ache, but Daniel, he made me feel alive, and so, for the first time in my life, I didn't listen to my family. I listened to myself. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Daniel wasn't just in business. He was quietly building a tech company. One that would, in just a few years, explode into a global empire. The man who sat in my coffee shop booth, scribbling notes and sipping black coffee, would become a billionaire before his 30th birthday, and I, Emily, the ordinary one, would be his wife. But that's not the end of the story. Because when my family found out who Daniel really was, the same family that laughed at me, dismissed me, told me I'd never be enough, they came crawling, begging, pretending they had always believed in me, and that's when I learned the sweetest kind of revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's watching the people who doubted you realize they were wrong. The moment my family discovered who Daniel really was, everything changed. It started innocently enough. I had been invited to my cousin's wedding. My mom insisted it would do me some good to socialize with family. Daniel, of course, came with me. He didn't make a big show of it. No flashy suit, no designer watch. Just the same quiet confidence I'd fallen in love with. But then, as the night went on, whispers started. Is that Emily's fiancé? I think so. Isn't he some tech guy? My mother noticed, of course. She always notices everything. I could see her stiffen, the way her hands tightened around her clutch, and then, the question came, sharp and incredulous. Emily, honey, what exactly does Daniel do again? I smiled politely. He's an entrepreneur. He's working on a few tech projects. My father's eyebrows shot up. Projects? His voice was skeptical, like he couldn't wrap his head around the possibility that his ordinary daughter could attract someone capable of real success. That was the first night I noticed the subtle shift. My parents' dismissive glances became curious stares. The smirks of my sisters faded into forced smiles. For the first time, they weren't looking at me like I was insignificant. They were measuring me. Evaluating. Calculating. It was delicious. Daniel, of course, remained completely oblivious to the chaos he caused. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He never flaunted his accomplishments. He simply was. Quiet, intelligent, utterly brilliant, yet completely grounded. Over the next few months, his company exploded. A breakthrough in software development led to investment offers from some of the biggest firms in the country. Suddenly, he was being invited to conferences, tech panels, and private investor dinners, and I went along with him, stepping into a world I had never imagined. I remember one particular evening vividly. We were at a gala in New York City, a massive, glittering affair, every wall lined with chandeliers, every guest dressed like royalty. My parents had been invited too, under the pretense that it was a family evening. When they arrived, I noticed it immediately. They weren't walking into the room with confidence, they were walking in with awe. My mom's lips pressed together, her eyes flicking from Daniel to me, as if trying to read the secret behind my sudden rise. My dad's jaw was tight, his pride and disbelief wrestling with each other, and my sisters, oh, my sisters. Rebecca, always so poised, always so self-assured, could barely hide the shock in her eyes. Claire, sweet little Claire, tried to smile, but it was brittle, like porcelain teetering on the edge of a table. Daniel, naturally, was polite and charming, shaking hands and introducing me with that warm smile that made everyone want to like him. He never once flaunted his wealth or influence. He simply existed, and the room responded, and my family, they realized they had been wrong. The weeks that followed were strange. Invitations came for brunches, dinners, casual catch-ups. Suddenly, my parents wanted to be seen with me. My sisters tried to appear casual, making comments like, "So, you're dating a really successful guy now, huh?" I smiled and nodded. I didn't correct them when they called him really successful. Because by the time they truly understood, it was too late for them to act like they hadn't underestimated me. One evening, my mother cornered me in the kitchen again. The words came out in a rush, almost like she was scared I'd disappear before she had a chance to speak. "Emily, we're proud of you," she said, her voice wavering. "Daniel, he's incredible. Truly. I mean, Who wouldn't be proud? I looked at her, holding back a smile. Thanks, Mom. She hesitated. I wish we had seen this sooner. Maybe we misjudged you. It was almost comical how much they wanted my approval now. The same people who had once laughed at me, told me I was too ordinary, were suddenly desperate to be a part of my life, and yet, not everything was perfect. Success, as it turns out, magnifies everything, not just achievements, but insecurities, envy, and betrayal. My sisters, who had always been my companions in childhood, started showing their true colors. Rebecca, who had always been competitive, began making subtle digs. Comments like, "Oh, Emily, do you really think he'd look twice at you if you weren't married to him?" Or Claire, who pretended to be sweet but often whispered behind my back to friends, saying things like, "I can't believe she's with him. She's just ordinary. Luckier than anyone has a right to be." And my parents? Well, they oscillated between feigned pride and passive-aggressive jabs that made me wonder if they would ever truly accept me for who I was, or only for the wealth I now represented through it all. Daniel remained my anchor point. One rainy evening, after a particularly awkward family dinner where my mother had subtly compared my achievements to Rebecca's, I leaned against the window of our apartment, staring at the city lights. "I can't believe how fake they are," I muttered. Daniel joined me silently, wrapping his arm around my shoulder. "You think they're fake," he said softly, "but they've always been afraid. Afraid that someone ordinary, someone real, could rise above them. They don't understand it because they've never had to fight for it." I nodded. I don't know if I can deal with it anymore. The jealousy, the subtle digs, the pretending." He kissed the top of my head. "You don't have to. Let them watch. Let them wonder. You've already won." And in that moment, I realized he was right. The sweetest revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It's quiet. It's the knowledge that the people who doubted you are watching you thrive while they remain. The same. By the end of that year, Daniel's company had gone public. He was officially a billionaire. Invitations from elite events flooded in. And my family, they begged, pleaded, and finally demanded to meet him, not as my husband, but as their own ticket to social recognition. I smiled politely, agreed to a small dinner at our home, and watched as they walked in, eyes wide, jaws tight, trying to mask their or I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I knew exactly what they were thinking. She proved us wrong. She's more than ordinary. And Daniel is ours now too. Little did they know, I had something far more satisfying planned. The night I invited my family to dinner, I felt a strange mix of excitement and something darker. Not fear, exactly. Not anger either. More like anticipation. For years, they had belittled me, dismissed me, told me I would never amount to anything. Now, they were walking into my home, into my life, into a world they had claimed I would never reach. And I was ready. I remember opening the door and seeing their faces. My mom's lips pressed into a tight line. My dad's brows were furrowed, like he was still trying to calculate what had gone wrong. Rebecca, always so poised, looked like she wanted to scold me, but she couldn't find the words. Claire's eyes darted nervously from Daniel to me, like she was waiting for someone to prove that I was still ordinary. I stepped aside, letting Daniel greet them. "Emily has told me so much about all of you," Daniel said, shaking my father's hand firmly, offering a polite smile to my mother. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." I watched their expressions shift subtly as the realization sank in. This was no ordinary man. He was calm, commanding, intelligent, someone who clearly knew his worth and wasn't afraid to own it. And he was mine. Dinner was served in the dining room, lit by soft candlelight. The table was immaculate, every detail perfect. I had planned this meticulously, not to flaunt, but to make a subtle point. As the evening went on, the tension was palpable. My parents tried to make conversation, but their usual condescension was missing. Rebecca made small talk about work, but her words lacked conviction. Claire kept picking at her salad, eyes flicking to Daniel as if searching for a flaw. And then came the questions. "So, Daniel, how did you get started in your company?" my dad asked, voice careful, almost reverent. Daniel answered patiently, detailing the early struggles, the late nights, the sheer determination it took. He spoke humbly, but with a confidence that left no doubt. This man had built an empire from nothing. I watched my family absorb it, their jaws tight, their eyes wide, Realizing they had been utterly wrong about me, it was my moment that I set down my fork and looked directly at my mother. "You remember what you said, right?" I asked softly, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. She blinked, confused. I'm not sure what you mean." I smiled. "You said I was too ordinary to ever find a good husband. You said I wouldn't amount to anything. That I'd never be enough." Her face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. Rebecca's hands fidgeted in her lap. Claire looked like she might crawl under the table. "Well," I continued, calm but cutting, "I guess I proved you wrong." I could see the shock ripple across their faces. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. Words failed her, and Daniel, quiet until now, simply reached for my hand. He didn't need to say anything. His touch said it all. "She is enough. And we are unstoppable together." The rest of dinner was tense, but in a satisfying way. My parents tried to recover, offering compliments that rang hollow. My sisters attempted polite smiles, but I could feel the envy simmering beneath their skin. Later, when the dinner ended and they left, I stood at the door, Daniel beside me. "Did you see their faces?" I whispered, laughing softly. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I did. But more importantly, I saw you. And I saw how strong you are." I leaned against him, feeling a surge of triumph I had never known before. For years, I had been ordinary in their eyes. Now, I was unstoppable. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't change except in one key way. I no longer cared what my family thought. Invitations and pleas kept coming, but I had learned something invaluable: their approval was meaningless. I had my own life, my own achievements, my own happiness, and Daniel? He was my partner in everything. Quietly brilliant, endlessly supportive, utterly devoted. With him, I realized that life wasn't about being seen by those who doubted you, it was about seeing yourself, and building a world where you could thrive. I also realized something else: revenge isn't about getting back at people. It's about living so fully and unapologetically that the people who underestimated you can't help but watch, powerless, as you shine. And let me tell you, it's the sweetest kind of victory. By the time my family stopped pretending, I had already moved on. I had moved up. I had built a life they could never take from me. And in the rare moments I thought of their opinions, I smiled, because I knew the truth. They had judged me as ordinary, and I had become extraordinary, not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I finally believed in myself, and that is a power no one can take away. It's funny how life works sometimes. For years, I believed I was invisible. Ordinary. Forgotten. Not enough. And I let other people's opinions shape the way I saw myself. I listened to the whispers, the jabs, the well-meaning advice, and for a long time, I accepted it as truth until I met Daniel. By the time this chapter of my life begins, everything has changed. Daniel's company is thriving. We've traveled the world, built homes that reflect our tastes, and created a life of comfort, excitement, and love. But more importantly, I've changed. I've learned that being ordinary doesn't mean being powerless. That kindness, resilience, and intelligence, things no one in my family seemed to value, can create a life far beyond anyone's expectations. And my family? Well, they've learned the same lesson, though it came with a bitter aftertaste. After that fateful dinner where I reminded them exactly what they had said to me all those years ago, they stopped trying to impress me. The subtle digs, the envy, the pretenses, faded. Rebecca stopped commenting on my life, though she couldn't resist posting photos on social media about her own achievements, hoping I'd notice. Claire still called occasionally, but her tone was polite, distant, almost afraid. My parents, they never apologized directly. But the way they interacted with me changed. They respected me, or at least, they learned not to dismiss me. It was enough. One evening, as Daniel and I sat in our living room overlooking the city, I thought back to the very first time I felt invisible, overhearing my mother in the kitchen, telling her sister I'd never find a good husband because I was too ordinary. I laughed softly, leaning against Daniel. "You know," I said, "I'm glad they said that to me." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because it made me realize something important," I said. "I don't need their approval. I don't need their validation. I need myself. And once I believed in me, everything else followed." He smiled, brushing my hair behind my ear. "You're extraordinary, Emily. Always were. You just didn't see it until now. I smiled back, feeling a warmth in my chest I had never felt before. Triumph. Peace. Freedom, and that, I realized, is the true revenge, not the glares, not the whispers, not the envy in their eyes. Those are sweet, yes, but fleeting. The real victory is living your life fully, unapologetically, on your own terms. Ordinary? Not anymore. I have everything I could have dreamed of, and more: love, success, confidence, and a partner who sees me in a way no one ever did. And when I look back at the people who doubted me, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude, because without their disbelief, I might never have discovered just how extraordinary I could be. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that little girl standing at the landing, overhearing those words that once cut so deep, too ordinary. I want to tell her, you're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to be unstoppable, and now, I've built a life they can't take away. I've become everything they said I couldn't be, and in that, I found my power, my peace, and my triumph. Ordinary no more.